Hello, my name's Sky and I'm an events coordinator at Legal Cheek. Today, I will be interviewing Johnny Hurst, Head of Outreach and Student Recruitment at BPP University Law School. He will be answering a few questions on the topic of when the legal profession will be moving to SQE cohorts. Hi, Johnny. Thanks so much for joining me.
Morning, Sky.
Morning. Could you just start by putting this topic in context?
Yeah, I think it's really important because I do appreciate that the students who watch these videos on the fantastic SQE hub that Legal Chic have created are coming to the SQE with different levels of knowledge and understanding. So let's just talk it in basic terms. The legal profession, when is it going to commit to the SQE? Well, let's put it all in context. What's the current route to qualification? It's the legal practice course pathway. This is still very much an option for many students. And what that is once you've got your law degree or a graduate recruitment qualification like a GDL, a PGDL, or a law foundations course, you then can go on to do the LPC. The legal practice course, and then a 2-year training contract. And traditionally, in most cases, there were exceptions, but in most cases, that was very much a linear route where you do your academic study, either your law degree or your conversion course, then you do your LPC, and then you do your training contract, 2 years, typically at one firm. And this is very much, as I said, a very linear route, where it's very different under the new SQE scheme, which is has come into force from September 2021. So the options for qualifying work experience, which is what is replacing the training contract under the old regime, are very varied. So what does the SQE regime look like? Well, once you've got a degree, it doesn't have to be a law degree. You can then go on to do the SQE assessments. We would recommend any non-lawyer, though, does do a preparation, like a foundation course, before you do the SQE training course and the SQE assessments. And you can then go on to do qualifying work experience, which is 2 years at maybe a single firm, but it can be up to 4 firms or 4 legal employers, some working in-house, some at a charity maybe, some at a legal advice centre or a legal advice clinic. It's very flexible in terms of the types of employers you can work for under the qualifying work experience training. And also the timing of it's very different. Remember, I said under the legal practice course route, you do your training right at the end after you've got your academic and vocational studies out of the way. You can actually study after you've completed your qualifying work experience. So, for example, you could be a paralegal and have been a paralegal for 2, 3, 4, 5 years and already clocked up your 2 years qualifying work experience and then embark on the SQE assessments. So it's very different in terms of how you can piece together the SQE and the training under the qualifying work experience. And so the dilemma a lot of firms have got is that they have been running very successfully legal practice course cohorts for many years. At the end of that linear timeline that I explained, and now they have to work in, well, how do we fill in and train our future lawyers at different points of their training, or what's the policy of this firm? And they've got also other things to take into account, the fact that they may well have solicitor apprenticeships and graduate apprenticeships as well, which are running slightly differently to qualifying work experience, but all have qualifying as a solicitor at the end goal. So the situation is very complicated at the moment for law firms, because rather than having just one way to qualify as a solicitor, there's now multiple ways. And that really is the context to this particular discussion we're having, Sky.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that quick intro. So I guess if we just kind of delve a bit deeper and unpick some of those questions that you just threw up, I have a couple of questions to ask you, Johnny. The first being, who are the big names who have committed to the SQE to date, and when have they committed from?
Really good question, Sky. I think it's worthwhile just adding to my contextualization of the whole topic as well, that we are very much at the moment, and we're recording this in April, the end of April 2022, we're very much in a state of transition at the moment from the LPC pathway to the SQE pathway. Indeed, many firms are still training solicitors through the LPC training contract pathway, and will do so for the next year or two almost certainly. But alongside that, there are more and more students that are starting to be enrolled onto SQE courses and onto SQE qualifying work experience training programs in law firms. So the question was, who are the big names that have committed to the SQE to date? Well, the first set of names I should mention are what we call the City Consortium of firms that are probably well known to a number of students watching this video. They are Freshfields, Herbert Smith Freehills, Hogan Lovells, Linklaters, Norton Rose, Fulbright, and Slaughter and May. They are a consortium of law firms that together decide and approach to BPP to train their students, and we have them starting later this year on their first SQE program. Indeed, they will be talking about it at quite some length at the Legal Egg conference in May, so I'm not going to steal their thunder now, but they were the first sort of named block of leading law firms that committed to the SQE, and as I said, they're starting from well, in a few months' time, later in 2022. Alongside them, there are two other leading law firms that are starting with BPP in September for their SQE programs for their trainees under a qualifying work experience program. But in addition to those firms, there are several other major firms who've chosen BPP as their provider for SQE training programs, and also graduate solicitor apprenticeships, which also prepare their students for the SQE to qualify as solicitors. And just to roll off a few names there's BCLP, Cripps, Cripps, Pemberton Greenish, Denton's, DWF, Kennedy's, KPMG, Osborne Clark, Travers Smith. I mean, there's quite a few, just Walker Morris, Waitman's, amongst others. Indeed, some of those, for example, DWF and Kennedy's have already started their graduate apprenticeship program, and they are due to take their, certainly the DWF trainees under the graduate apprenticeship program are due to take their SQE 1 assessments in July. But what you'll notice, and this is the flavour at the moment, is that firms have started to commit, but only a few have actually started the courses so far. A select few will be starting in this year, but we'll see a much more commitment, I think, from 2023 onwards. In terms of the programs that people are doing, they are going to be incredibly varied. And again, I'm not going to steal the thunder of the consortium firms, who will talk about that at the Legal Egg conference with Legal Chic next month. But it's fair to say that not all firms are looking at either the program they want their students to do or the actual training program that they will put their students on in the same way. For example, some firms who are doing the graduate apprenticeship will do a teaching block of learning before they start work in the office. Others are delivering the learning in a longer format, whereby they give their students day release whilst they're working in the office. So there isn't a one-size-fits-all model, which was very much like the model for the LPC. Lots of firms are doing it in lots of different ways.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for explaining that so thoroughly. Just leading on from that, why could you kind of explain why some firms are committing to the SQE and not others?
Well, that's a really good question. I think certainly some of the firms that have started looking at it, and some of the firms I mentioned earlier, are already, and we are already working with their trainees who are currently paralegals, because they are recruiting internally to qualify as solicitors. So we're training cohorts who are internal cohorts at the moment with a number of the firms I listed. And I think partly it's because they recognise they've got an extremely talented pool of learners and workers there who are capable to qualify as solicitors who are currently working as paralegals. In that way, I think it's quite a helpful introduction to the SQE for the learning and development team in those law firms, so that they can, with a very small cohort of students or employees going through the SQE who are currently paralegals, they can learn from that, so that when they develop their external training programs and recruit for the SQE in 23-24 onwards, they've got a better idea how to plan for much bigger cohorts. So I think, yeah, the strategy with some firms is to take on board the SQE for their internal candidates first, and then expand it in 1 or 2 years' time for external cohorts. But I think the main reason why a lot of firms haven't committed yet is that the old system was very much tried and tested, and you knew what you were getting from an LPC graduate and a trainee under a conventional training contract. And a lot of the firms' approach to that has been, well, if it ain't broke, let's not fix it yet. A lot of firms are taking a lot of time to make sure that when they do make the transition, they get it right. I think the firms that have committed already have obviously gone through that process and are very confident that certainly working with us, then in partnership with us, we and they will deliver the absolute right training for their trainees. But it's taking different firms different amounts of time, to get their internal programs sorted so that they're 100% happy with them, but also some are a little being maybe perhaps a little bit more cautious than others and waiting to see what the SQE looks like and how it's gone through one or two iterations. Perhaps, there may be some teething problems in the first one or two iterations of the SQE1 and SQE2 assessments, and those firms want to wait for it to bed down until their cohorts start going through the SQE process. So yeah, some are being just a little bit cautious to plan internally, but also just to wait for the system to bed down.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Kind of moving on to a slightly different question. I wondered, are firms taking on mixed cohorts of the LPC and kind of SQE graduates, or i.e. are they running training contracts and QWE in parallel with each other in this transitional phase?
That's really interesting, and there are different firms are doing different things, as you would expect. It's so different to the old system where the model was very similar no matter which firm you looked at. So are we going to get mixed cohorts of LPC and SQE cohorts? Certainly initially, I think certainly the official line from all the firms I've spoken to, and I work very closely with our client relationship team here at BPP, they tell me that if the candidate's good enough, if they've done the LPC or done the SQE or not done either beforehand, if they're good enough, they want to hire them and they'll make it work. I think what firms are trying to do is trying to avoid mixed cohorts as much as possible in most cases, just because it means that if people have gone through the same academic and vocational education trainings programs, it's easier to plan their learning and development through the law firm once they join the firm from the same starting point. But if you've got part of a cohort starts with an LPC, part with an SQE background, there's obviously going to be some skills and knowledge gaps between the two cohorts because the systems aren't quite the same. That said, the way that we are working with the leading law firms that I've mentioned already, we are delivering pretty much the same quality of trainees, if not better, under the new system. And therefore, I think firms are confident that they're going to get what they need going forward. But generally speaking, they're going to try and avoid those mixed cohorts. That said, a firm like Kennedy's have been very open. I remember them chatting to me on a panel session that I chaired a few months ago, where they said actually they are running an LPC cohort as well as an SQE cohort at the moment, and the LPC cohort are doing the traditional 4 seats rotating around 4 different practice areas, which you would expect in an old style training contract, whereas their SQE cohorts of trainees are focusing on specializing in one single department within the firm. So very different experience. But of course, by the time they qualify, they are incredibly experienced in their practice area. So they probably look like somebody who's 1 or 2 years qualified on day one of their qualification because of the amount of experience they've got. So there are different ways that people are doing things, and yeah, there are some mixed cohorts, but I think over time, over the course of the next few years, I think certainly 2023 is going to be the tipping point where law firms, I think a lot of them are going to start committing to the SQE then, and then you'll start to see from sort of 24, 25. Fewer mixed cohorts and almost entire SQE cohorts. But of course, there will be a lot of legacy LPC graduates who will be taken on by these law firms, but they may have to go through the route of having to do the SQE2 assessments in order to qualify via the qualifying work experience method, because that's a different option open to LPC graduates as well when the old style training contracts end.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing your insights on that. It's really interesting to hear kind kind of your take on that. My final question I have is, when do you think most of the firms will move to the SQE?
So I alluded to that, I think, in my last answer, in that I think certainly we're going to see, there's not a lot of movement this year, as I mentioned earlier, 2022, but in 2023, I think we're going to see a major shift, because by then you've got to appreciate that we'll have had 2 sets of results of the SQE, both SQE1 and SQE2 by this time next year, and therefore we would expect, I think, firms to be more confident in the new system. They'll also have had another year to plan to make sure they got everything right. And those firms that are already training their students, typically with BPP internally through our programs, with their internal paralegal, will feel more confident to commit then to the SQE for their future cohorts. So I'd say you'll start to see major movement in 23, and certainly in 2024 I would think that the majority of firms will have committed to the SQE. I wouldn't be surprised if quite a few won't have committed to the SQE by then, but I think by 25 certainly that they will be in the minority.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Donny. That covers all of the questions I had on this topic. If you have any other questions about the SQE, be sure to check out our SQE Hub page on the Legal Cheat website. This includes recordings of SQE related events, which we've had in partnership with BPP, and also editorial pieces about the SQE. Thank you so much, Donny, for your time. It's been really great to chat, and I think hopefully we've shed some light on this topic.
Thanks, Guy. That's been great, and look forward to working with you again soon.
Yeah, you too.